What's up guys, and welcome to this episode of Gearist TV. Today we're bringing you the review for the EM Road N0 from Pearl Izumi. When it comes to the Emotion line by Pearl Izumi, they have really stepped up their game an impressive amount. I mean, prior to this, and years past, Pearl Izumi shoes have been really quite cookie cutter, and there's just nothing that special about them. They were pretty clunky, pretty soft, foamy. There was just nothing really going on. And the direction that they've taken with the Emotion line is really fantastic, because they've come at it from a more structurally dynamic, a biomechanically structural dynamic, really looking to make the shoe act like the foot does during the natural gait cycle. Now, I have to admit that with this shoe, and I said this as well in the written review, that I'm having a bit of writer's block, or in this case, speaker's block a little bit. And the reason for that is that I love this shoe. It is awesome. And the reason that I say I have writer's block about it is because I feel like I don't want to appear overly gushy or anything like that, because that's not my intent. I really genuinely like this shoe. Now, when we take a look at shoes, we do so very critically, not comparing them most of the time to other shoes unless it's, say, a shoe in a series or something like that. But we look at them very objectively. In this shoe, there's simply not really anything that strikes me as being way off. So believe me, there are a couple things that I'll mention, that I'll talk to you about, that aren't really negatives so much. They're just not a full checkbox or a full check mark in the checkbox or something. So bear with me and let's get into it. As always, we're going to start with the outsole of the shoe. Now, the outsole of the EM Road N0 is a combination of outsole grade EVA foam, which is this part right here that's not rubber, and then carbon rubber here in the heel, and then blown rubber elements up here in the forefoot and the toe. It's a full length outsole, so there are no cutaways. There's nothing cut out of the instep or anything like that, so you can see it is absolutely full contact front to back. It also incorporates the Emotion line's dynamic offset, which we're going to touch on a little bit later. Now, it's clear to anyone that's running other shoes that are in the Emotion line that the DNA of that whole dynamic offset setup and the sculpture and the shape of the shoe starts in the outsole, not just in the midsole, and that's no different in this one. The first thing I'll point out is that carbon rubber that I mentioned in the last kind of inch of the heel or so. It extends about 25% of the way out the lateral heel, which, if you're going to heel strike in this shoe, is more than likely what's going to hit the ground. Your foot's going to come in something like this if you're going to heel strike, which is interesting that you would heel strike in this shoe, but that's another story altogether. In the toe, the blown rubber that appears is pretty much right here, and then it extends down the medial forefoot right here. And then there's this little spine line, which you can see here, which is very evident in other models. It's actually a full rubber line in other models, but in this it just kind of extends back under kind of like the third or fourth metatarsal there. The reason that this rubber is sectionalized like this, as we've talked about with a number of models of shoes in the past, is that it doesn't necessarily need to have rubber all over the place. That's the first reason. So you've got it where you're going to have your high impact areas. If it were me, I'd like to see a little more here on the lateral edge of the forefoot, just because I tend to land there some of the time. But the other thing is that it cuts weight. This is a key component of the shoe, being that it is a racing flat and it needs to be light. I am always curious to see how outsole grade EVA does in shoes, and for the most part in this shoe it's holding up very nicely right alongside that rubber. The only spot, again, that I mentioned, I would like to see a little bit more rubber right there. It doesn't necessarily need to extend all the way down from the forefoot, but you can see where I've kind of worn it a little bit right there. That's primarily because if you're landing on a forefoot, if you're landing right under your body in the midfoot, you're probably going to put quite a bit of force there. So if there were a way to cut some weight and still have that piece of rubber right there, I think that would take this next level. So now let's chat about the midsole right here. Now, the theory behind the dynamic offset in Pearl Izumi's Emotion line is that the shoe has different drops or different offsets at different points during the gait cycle. Now, that can get a little bit confusing because you have a stack height that's going to be, say, 4 millimeters when you land, or 1.5 millimeters when you land, and then 4 millimeters at mid stance. And it just gets a little bit out of whack, especially since with a lot of shoes that's the case. Most shoes, in fact, when you land on a 20-some millimeter heel, you're still compressing that foam, especially if it's got a lower durometer. So it stands to reason that any shoe, to some degree, has a dynamic offset to some degree. In this, I think rather than looking at the different numbers as we roll through the offset, what we're truly going to look at is how the midsole is shaped and sculpted to, again, function with. Now, in some of the models in the Emotion line, and we mentioned this in the EM Road N1, which you can see here, there's a bit of a rockered shape. But as we covered, it's not really a rocker necessarily so much as it is the toe spring being moved back about 20% down the shoe. In the EM Road N0, this is much less prevalent because again, it's a racing flat, closer to the ground, less material, but it's still there, as you can tell here. The offsets, just for the record, are 22 millimeters in the heel, 16 millimeters in the forefoot, making for a net drop of 6 millimeters. The trick is, again, that is a deceptive number if you look at it from a marketing standpoint. The marketing says a little bit different, but this doesn't run like that, and we're going to talk about that in the ride section coming up. What's great about the midsole of this shoe is that it does everything that it should and does nothing that it shouldn't. There are no shanks, there are no stiff places, there are no posting foam or more dense foam. It's extremely flexible. It's very, very lightweight. I don't want to talk about too much of this because we'll get into the ride, and I'm going to save that for the ride section. And quite simply, the shape of this midsole outsole combo really translates into a super quick, and as we mentioned in other Emotion line shoes, super smooth transition for a really smooth ride, again, which we'll talk about in the ride section. Now, the upper of the EM Road N0 is made from a double layered synthetic mesh, okay? It's got a really nice smooth backing on it, that double layer. The backside is a little more fine mesh, which makes it really appropriate for barefoot running. We're going to talk about in a second. Up here in the toe and in the heel kind of support area and right here through the midfoot, these are TPU foam support pieces. That's what accounts for the structure of this shoe. The tongue of the shoe is the same mesh as the rest of the upper. It's just got a slight amount of foam backing, kind of similar to the collar area. This upper is really awesome. It feels amazing on the foot. Now, what's great about it is that it really feels like it's made for your foot. I've seen other people comment on the same exact thing. When you put the shoe on, especially if you put it on barefoot, which again, I tend not to, but I did a couple times in this because I always try to do it once or twice just to get the feel of it, it feels amazing on your foot. Part of the reason that it can achieve that is because it's so supple. You can see here, it's just so supple. There's not a ton. They haven't used these support structure elements to make a bunch of lines up here that are going to hold it in different places. And that is indicative of a lot of racing flats, but in this it seems to be very supple and just really almost like a slipper. The tongue, being made out of that same mesh and backed by the same type of mesh, really tends to just kind of disappear into the top of the shoe, and it doesn't affect the foot at all. It does tend to want to mosey to the lateral side, and you have a little bit of tongue slide. It's not gusseted. Not a huge deal because, again, it disappears. In some other shoes where the tongue is very prevalent, when you're putting it on, you can feel that tongue kind of slide at the side. This, not so much, because it's all kind of part of that one single piece feel upper. The laces on the upper have a tiny bit of stretch, not a lot at all, just a hair, but when you combine that over the length of the lace, it makes them a little bit stretchy. Now, for me, this was not a problem at all. However, I will say that if you're trying to really dial the tightness that you want the shoe to be at, it may be a little bit tricky to really nail it. So you may find yourself stopping about 10-15 minutes into a run and going, I feel like I could get a little bit tighter, or something like that because it's stretched out a little bit. It's not like it stretches out and doesn't come back. It just, your foot will adapt to it, and the shoe will your foot will have to adapt along with the shoe together to see what the right tightness of those laces is for you. Now, that slipper-like feel of the upper that I mentioned, it translates down into the outsole and the midsole too. This thing not only being a really super comfortable running shoe, but it's seriously, if you're going out on a weekend to kick around with your family and flip-flops aren't necessarily in the cards, so comfortable. All right, let's talk about fit. Now, first, sizing, spot on. I wear 11. This is an 11 and it works just right. However, if you like to size down in your racing flats, do it. You should have no problem, and this will just snug right up against your foot the way that any other racing flat would. As for the rest of the fit, as I mentioned, this shoe fits just like a pair of slippers that are made for your foot. It really truly molds to your foot. And I know that sounds like hyperbole, like I'm going over the top. I promise you, for me, that is the way that this shoe feels. It is 100% comfortable. I mean, it's amazing. And the fit is just fantastic because, again, it adapts to your shoe so well. The heel counter is only semi-rigid, so that really just molds your foot. It doesn't give anything that's rigid in the way to kind of fight with your foot. It just really does what your foot wants to. Now, when I reviewed the EM Road N1, which we talked about a second ago, I remarked on how smooth that shoe was because it was. And I was a little concerned with this, not concerned, but curious as to how the N0 was going to ride since there's so much less material and it's a racing flat, and sometimes racing flats can be a little bit of a raw kind of a ride. But I was really pleasantly surprised. That shape that works with the biomechanics of your body really is still very present. Yes, it's not as great as it is there in the EM Road N1 or another shoe in the line, because the material isn't as heavy and the toe spring and the shape isn't as heavy, but it's still super, super smooth. And another thing adding to that smoothness is the firmness or the softness, whichever way you want to look at it, of the outsole and the midsole combination. It's not squishy, it's not super firm, so you don't feel like you're running into concrete with it. It's just right where it should be. And I'd love to see what the durometer is on that, because I want to dial in my own durometer and just see where I feel most comfortable. Another thing is that this shoe is fast. Yes, it's a racing flat, it's supposed to feel fast, but I found myself, for about the first 5 minutes in this, I found myself trying to kind of figure out, well, how am I going to run in this? You know, what's the way that I'm going to go at it? Because a lot of times for me personally, my cadence gets kind of high in racing flats, and that's fine, as it should be, but my stride also shortens up out the back. And so with this, I really kind of took about 5 minutes and really looked at it pretty objectively, and then once I figured out how to run in it, I mean, it just opened up a new world. I really elongated my stride, really made sure to extend out the back, and it just felt super, super fantastic to just let it flow. Now, there are shoes that may have a little bit more pop to them than this shoe does sometimes, but the way they accomplish that is through rigidity. So there's more rigidity in the midfoot that's going to give that pop. And that's fine in this shoe, because what this does, instead of relying on the mechanics of the shoe to accomplish that, it allows the natural mechanics of your body to accomplish that pop. And it's really quite a cool feeling to just give in to the natural elasticity of the lower leg. Without exaggeration, the EM Road N0 is one of my favorite shoes of the year, period. It's really a fantastic shoe. It's light, 6 ounces in a men's size 9. This is a size 11. It's super quick, as I mentioned. And it's also got a great amount of cushioning that comes from both the shape of the shoe, the materials itself, and the biomechanics that it's supposed to enhance. On top of that, it gives that great cushioning and shock absorption without damaging ground feel. While I'm honestly not sure that I make this my everyday trainer, simply because of the durability factor, I'd like to see a little more rubber here for that to be the case. But if there were rubber right there, this would be my everyday running shoe. It's so comfortable. And it's also $100, which makes it very approachable to those that are afraid of buying a racing flat for both fear that it's going to be a harsh ride and because they don't want to have a shoe that's going to cost $1 billion and not be so durable. I could easily see this shoe, no problem, getting around 250 miles out of it, which is quite great for a racing flat. Like I said at the top of the review, this may seem a little bit gushy to some people, but I promise you that's not my intent. Everything I've said about this shoe is the way that I feel about it. It is fact. It is my opinion. Now, before you go passing judgment and saying, there's no way that it feels that good, there's no way that it's that comfortable, try it on. Everybody should always try things on, and don't pass judgment just based on my review. Don't listen to me if you don't want to, but try it on, please. I promise you, you're not going to be disappointed. Now let's do the ratings. First up is construction, for which we're going to give it 5 stars. Now, apart from the fact that it's a really well-made shoe, you've got this toe bumper here, which is really going to keep it quite durable up here in the front, and it's just really solidly put together. Next is durability. We're going to give it 4 stars. The only reason for that is because I wish there were a tiny bit of rubber right here on that lateral forefoot to really accommodate people like myself that tend to land in that area. Comfort, 5 stars. It's like a slipper. Seriously, you could wear this around your house and you would not know that you weren't wearing a slipper at all. Fit, also 5 stars. It just flippin' fits. It feels like it fits your foot. Not my foot, your foot, your foot. For weight, we're going to give it 4.5 stars. It is a light shoe. Again, 6 ounces, men's size 9. But it could come down a little bit. There are racing flats that are quite a bit lighter than that. I don't know where to say to save that weight, but it could probably find a little bit here or there to shave off. Finally, performance, we're going to give it 5 stars. This shoe does an excellent job. It's quick, it's agile, it just works. It lets you open up that gait, it lets you feel your stride and be active in your run. So now we want to know, what do you look for in a racing flat? Do you look for a shoe that can go out and rip it up, or do you like to wear your racing flats for some everyday runs here and there? Let us know in the comments section below. Thank you guys so much for watching this episode of Gearist TV. Don't forget to like and favorite this video and subscribe to our channel. As always, please find us on the social networks, facebook.com/Gearist, Instagram @TheGearist, Twitter @TheGearist, youtube.com/Gearist. youtube.com/thegearist, which you're watching right now. And guys, we've got promotions coming up, so be sure to subscribe, because if you do, you'll be notified that you can get bonus entries by being subscribed and leaving comments. Also, as always, click on over to Gearist.com and take a look around at all of our other reviews. If you've got any questions about this review or any of our other videos here on Gearist TV, please leave those in the comments section below. We love hearing from you guys, and we just like talking to you. Thank you guys so much, and we'll see you next time.